I have thought about the silence that followed my answer 1,000 times. I have replayed it, dissected it, weighed its density in my memory. It was not an empty silence. It was a solid thing, a presence in the room that pressed the air from my lungs and pinned every person there to their spot. There is a moment, I know this now, when you stop falling and start choosing. The silence was the space between the two. But before that, before the answer that changed the weather in a room of dangerous men, there was the job. It began, as most things do, with a phone call on a Tuesday. A Tuesday is a nothing day, a day for invoices and lukewarm coffee. It is not a day for life-altering propositions. The voice on the phone was smooth, professional, and gave nothing away. It belonged to a Mr. Park. He was inquiring about my services. I restore things, not furniture or paintings, but paper, books, manuscripts, letters, the fragile ghosts of history. My work is quiet, meticulous, and requires a kind of monastic patience. Most of my clients are universities or private collectors with a passion for decaying marginalia. Mr. Park's client, he said, was different. The collection was extensive, the work would take months, and the compensation he named made me sit down. There was a condition. The work had to be done on site. For privacy reasons, he explained. The client was very private. I told myself it was the money. That's what I told my friend Sarah over coffee the next day. In the bright, normal clamor of a world, I was about to leave. I showed her the number on a napkin and she whistled. For old books? She said, her eyes wide. Mina, for that kind of money, you should be restoring the Dead Sea Scrolls and personally regilding the Vatican. I laughed, a thin, papery sound. It's just a job, Sarah. I knew even as I said it that I was lying. There was a pull, a curiosity about the kind of privacy that required a resident archivist. I told myself it was a professional challenge. I did not tell myself the truth, that my life had become too small, too quiet, too safe after Michael left, and I was hungry for something, anything, that felt like a risk. The address was a tower of black glass and steel that speared the sky over the city. It didn't have a name, just a number. The lobby was a cathedral of silence and marble, the air chilled to a precise, inhuman temperature. The carpet absorbed every footstep like a secret. Mr. Park was waiting for me. He was exactly as his voice had sounded. Smooth, tailored, and utterly unreadable. He was a man built of discreet angles and perfect posture. We rode the elevator in silence. There were no buttons. He pressed his thumb to a small, dark panel, and the ascent was so swift and quiet it felt like a pressure change in my own blood. We rose for a full minute. 60 seconds. I counted. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into the apartment. Penthouse, I corrected myself. The word, apartment, was insufficient for this space. The entire city was laid out below us, a silent, glittering panorama behind a wall of glass 2 stories high. The scale of it was designed to make you feel small. It worked. The light was a bruised gold of late afternoon. Everything was slate, dark wood, and chrome. There was no clutter, no photographs, no magazines, no sign that a human being actually lived here. It was less a home than a statement of formidable, untouchable wealth. And in the center of it all, he sat. He was in a wheelchair, positioned to face the window, his back to us. Even from behind, there was an impression of stillness that was more than just physical. It was a quality of containment, as if he were the calm eye of a storm his own presence generated. The room seemed to reorganize itself around him. Mr. Kwan, Mr. Park said, his voice a low hum. This is Ms. On. The chair turned, not with the jerky motion of a motor, but with a slow, deliberate hydraulic grace. And I saw him. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps my age, early 30s. His face was all sharp, beautiful lines, the kind of face that seemed carved from something more permanent than flesh. But it was his eyes that held me. They were dark, intelligent, and utterly, completely still. They saw everything. I felt stripped bare in the 3 seconds he looked at me before I remembered to bow my head slightly. Ms. On, he said. His voice was quiet, a low baritone with a rough edge, like velvet rubbed the wrong way. It was the only thing about him that seemed capable of friction. You came, it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. As if my arrival was an event he had orchestrated and was now merely confirming its completion. The commute was acceptable? I blinked. It was the most mundane question, yet coming from him in this place it felt absurd. Yes, I managed. There was no traffic. An almost smile touched his lips. It was there and gone in the space of a breath. A flicker of warmth that didn't have time to settle. There is never traffic on a Tuesday, he said, his gaze flicking to the city below as if he personally controlled its flow. Mr. Park will show you the library, just that. He turned back to the window, a clear dismissal. The audience was over. Mr. Park led me down a long, wide corridor. The silence was different here, deeper. The library was at the end of it, a room that was the heart of the penthouse's austerity. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of the same dark wood, filled with leather-bound volumes. In the center of the room, on a series of specially built tables, was the collection I was here to save. Centuries-old Korean texts, manuscripts bound in silk, records of a family whose history was written in ink and paper. My work, my reason for being here. I ran my fingers over the spine of one book, the leather dry and cracking. It was a mess, a beautiful, tragic, fascinating mess. He will not bother you, Mr. Park said from the doorway. I turned. He was watching me with that same unreadable expression. Mr. Kwan does not leave the penthouse. You will have the space you require, he said it as a reassurance, but it landed as a warning. He does not leave. The statement hung in the air. This whole world, this kingdom of glass and silence, was also his prison. I looked around the room, at the priceless, decaying history laid out before me. I told myself, again, that this was just a job, a difficult, well-paid job for a private client. But I felt a tremor of something else, something more complicated than professional interest. It was the feeling of stepping into a story that had begun long before you arrived, a story whose rules you did not yet understand. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that the man in the wheelchair was not just the client. He was the book I wasn't supposed to read. The first week was a study in silence and routine. I would arrive at 9, take the silent elevator up, and nod to Mr. Park, who was always somewhere in the periphery, a shadow in a perfect suit. I would walk down the long hall to the library, and the heavy door would close behind me, shutting out the rest of the penthouse. Inside, it was just me and the ghosts. I lost myself in the work. It was a relief. The delicate task of humidifying brittle paper, of mixing conservation-grade paste, of reinforcing a crumbling spine with a sliver of Japanese tissue. These were problems I understood. They had solutions. Unlike the man who lived down the hall. I did not see him. I heard him, sometimes, the quiet whir of his chair moving through the vast, empty spaces. It was a lonely sound. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was projecting my own unease onto the environment. I was a professional here to do a job. His life, his loneliness, his story. It was none of my business. That was the lie I lived by for the first 6 days. On the 7th day, he appeared in the doorway of the library. I didn't hear him approach. The thick carpet, the silent chair. I was bent over a 17th century text, examining the watermark on the paper with a backlit lens, and when I looked up, he was just there. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was on the books, the tools, the ordered chaos of my workstation. His hands rested on the controls of his chair, long-fingered and still. You are making progress, he said. Again, not a question. I'm assessing the damage, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Some of these texts require significant intervention before any restoration can begin. He guided the chair into the room. The movement was slow, precise. He stopped beside the table where I was working, his shoulder just inches from mine. I could smell the clean, sharp scent of his soap, something with sandalwood. It was an unexpectedly intimate detail. He looked down at the manuscript. My great-grandfather's journal, he said. His voice was low, almost a murmur. He was a scholar, poet, my grandmother said. Though the rest of the family considered him a failure, I glanced at his face, so close to mine. In profile, his beauty was severe. A scar, thin and white, cut through his left eyebrow, a detail I hadn't noticed from a distance. It was the only imperfect thing about him. His prose is economical, I said, choosing my words carefully. He looked at me then. The almost smile flickered again. He was a man of few words. It is a family trait. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was weighted, a conversation happening in the space between our words. I could feel his eyes on me as I returned my attention to the journal. I was intensely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his body, the quiet rhythm of his breathing. It was 11 minutes. I know because I timed my paced application. For 11 minutes, he sat beside me in perfect silence, watching me work. He watched as I carefully cleaned a smudge of time from a page, as I measured a piece of tissue paper to the millimeter, as I held my breath to place it just so. He watched my hands, and in those 11 minutes, the nature of my job changed. It was no longer just about the books. He left as quietly as he had arrived. The whir of the chair faded down the hall, and I was alone again. But the room was different. It was charged with his presence. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were trembling, not from fear, from something else, something I refused to name. From then on, his visits became a part of the routine. He would appear once a day, usually in the late afternoon when the light turned to amber. He never announced his arrival. He would simply be there. He rarely spoke. He just watched. I told myself it was quality control. He was the client checking on his investment. But I knew that wasn't it. The way he watched was too intent, too personal. He wasn't watching the work. He was watching me, and I, in turn, began to watch him. I learned the language of his stillness. A slight tightening of his jaw meant he was in pain. A fractional narrowing of his eyes meant something had displeased him on a phone call. I learned that the almost smile was his version of a full laugh, and that it appeared most often when I spoke about the historical figures in the journals as if they were real, flawed people. One afternoon, he found me frowning at a passage in a merchant's ledger from the 19th century. "A problem?" he asked. "No. Just a man complaining about his son." I pointed to the elegant, angry script. "He says his heir has no head for business, that he spends his days with calligraphers and his nights with courtesans, and that he will run the family into the ground." I looked up at him. "He sounds worried." Ji-hoon's gaze was fixed on the page. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine emotion in his eyes, a deep, ancient melancholy. "He is not worried," Ji-hoon said softly. "He is grieving. He is watching his son choose a different life, and he mistakes it for a rejection of his own." He looked at me, and his eyes held a profound, disquieting understanding. The son did not run the family into the ground. He became one of Josian's most celebrated painters. His work hangs in the National Museum. He paused. The father died thinking he had failed. In that moment, the distance between us collapsed. I wasn't the archivist. He wasn't the client. We were two people in a quiet room, talking about the ghosts of men who lived and died and misunderstood each other. It was the first time I felt the true, terrifying pull of his world, not the world of glass towers and silent assassins I imagined, but the world of his own mind. A world of lonely, painful clarity. That was my first mistake, letting him see that I understood. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of quiet work, of silent companionship, of conversations held in the spaces between words. The routines became rituals. The 9 a.m. arrival, the nod from Mr. Park, the heavy library door. Mrs. Choi, the discreet housekeeper who was a whisper of movement in the halls, began leaving a small tray for me in the library around noon. It always had a thermos of baricha, the roasted barley tea I had once mentioned I liked, and a small, perfect plate of fruit or rice cakes. I never saw her leave it. It was just there. I knew it was not Mrs. Choi's initiative. It was his. It was the way he communicated care, through intermediaries, through actions he could take from a distance. It was protection disguised as hospitality. I told myself it was thoughtful. I didn't let myself think about what it meant, this slow, careful insinuation into the details of my life. He knew what tea I liked. What did I know about him? I knew he liked the color gray. I knew he was in pain more often than he let on. I could see it in the tension in his shoulders when he thought I wasn't looking. I knew he had a mind that moved with a frightening surgical precision. And I knew he was desperately, profoundly lonely. The penthouse was his fortress, his kingdom, and his cage. I was a window into a world he couldn't touch, the world of the past, of books and ink, a world as contained and controlled as his own. Perhaps that's all I was to him. A curiosity, a diversion in the long, silent hours. That's what I tried to believe. It was safer that way. My friend Sarah called me one evening after I got home. My own apartment felt small and cluttered and wonderfully normal after the sterile expanse of the penthouse. "So," she said, her voice bright with wine and Friday night energy, "how's life with Mr. Big and Mysterious? Have you seen him in a tux yet? Does he have a butler named Jeeves?" I tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow. "It's just a job, Sarah. He's quiet. And he's in a wheelchair." I hadn't told her that part. I hadn't told anyone. It felt like a betrayal of his privacy, a secret that wasn't mine to share. There was a pause on her end. "Oh," she said, her voice softening. Is it okay?" I thought of his controlled stillness, the fierce intelligence in his eyes, the way he commanded a room without ever raising his voice or taking a single step. "He's fine," I said, the words reflexive. It was my wall, the one I put up when things got too close. "He is fine. I'm fine. We're all fine." "Mina," she said, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "You sound different. Are you sure you're okay? This whole setup sounds intense." "It's just for a few months." I lied. The work would take closer to a year. We both knew it. I knew it the moment I saw the collection. I was lying to her and I was lying to myself. I was already in deeper than I could admit. The next day, the first crack appeared in the perfect, silent surface of my new life. I was leaving the tower for the day, stepping out into the chaos of the city at dusk. The air was thick with the smell of street food and exhaust fumes. It was a relief, a sensory blast after the filtered air of the penthouse. A man bumped into me hard. A briefcase clattered to the ground. Papers scattered. "My apologies," he said, bending to help me gather them. He was well-dressed, handsome in a slick, predatory way, but his eyes were cold. They weren't looking at my scattered papers. They were looking at me. "You should be more careful, Mizan," he said, his voice a low purr. He handed me the last of my papers, his fingers brushing mine. His touch was like ice. "It's a dangerous city, especially for those who spend their time in towers made of glass," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then he was gone, melting into the evening crowd. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, my heart pounding. He knew my name. He knew where I worked. I told myself it was a coincidence. A creep. The city was full of them. But I knew it wasn't. The encounter felt targeted, deliberate. It was a message. When I got to my car, tucked away in a garage several blocks away, there was a single white gardenia resting on the windshield. It was a perfect, waxen bloom, intensely fragrant, and utterly out of place. There was no note. There didn't need to be. The message was clear. "We see you. We know who you are. We can get to you." I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I was being followed. Every pair of headlights felt like a threat. I didn't call the police. Who would I call? What would I say? A man bumped into me and said something vaguely menacing? An anonymous flower was left on my car? They would think I was paranoid. Maybe I was. I spent the night sleepless, the scent of the gardenia, which I had foolishly brought inside, filling my small apartment. It was a cloying, funereal smell. The next morning I went to work. It was the only thing I could think to do. To run would be to show fear. To stay was to pretend I had none. I walked into the penthouse with a resolve I did not feel. Mr. Park was waiting for me by the elevator. He didn't just nod today. He looked at me, a long, searching look. "Good morning, Ms. On," he said. His gaze flickered down to my hands, which I had clenched into fists at my sides. "Everything is satisfactory?" It was a real question. He knew. I had no idea how he knew, but he did. The surveillance in this place was total. They had seen the man. They had seen the flower. "I'm fine," I said, the two most dishonest words in the English language. He held my gaze for 2 seconds longer than the conversation required. It was a silent offer. "Tell me. Let us handle it." I said nothing. I would not be managed. I would not be a fragile thing that needed to be protected. That was my second mistake. Thinking my refusal was a sign of strength. It was not. It was a sign of ignorance. I was a child playing by rules I didn't understand in a game I didn't even know I was playing. In the library, another tray from Mrs. Choi was waiting. But today it wasn't tea. It was a small bowl of hot juk, a savory rice porridge, the kind my mother used to make for me when I was sick. It was food as comfort as medicine. It was a message of care so profound it made my eyes burn. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steam rising from the bowl. They knew I was scared, and their response was not to question me, but to offer me soup. I didn't see Ji-hoon at all that day. The silence from his end of the penthouse was absolute. It was a louder silence than any I had experienced before. It was the silence of a predator gathering itself. And for the first time I was truly afraid, not of the man on the street, but of the man in the wheelchair and the terrifying, invisible power he wielded. The week that followed was one of bruised gold light and unspoken tension. Ji-hoon resumed his visits to the library, but the atmosphere had changed. The easy silence was gone, replaced by a dense, watchful quiet. He would sit in his chair, his hands clasped, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the window, and the stillness in him was no longer just contained. It was coiled. He was a spring being wound tighter and tighter. I worked with a frantic, focused energy, pouring all my anxiety into the delicate work. I rebuilt the spine of a 16th century astronomical chart. I painstakingly separated pages that had been fused together by water damage a century ago. My hands were steady, my movements precise. It was a lie my body told to my mind. I knew I was being watched, not just by Ji-hoon. Mr. Park was a constant, silent presence. When I left at night, a black car, anonymous and immaculate, would be waiting at the curb. "A car service, Ms. On," Mr. Park had said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The evenings are getting darker." I didn't protest. The memory of the man with the cold eyes was too fresh. So I was driven home by a man who never spoke, whose eyes in the rearview mirror missed nothing. I was living in a gilded cage, and the bars were closing in. I told myself it was temporary. Precaution. I knew on some level that I was in danger, and that these men, in their own impenetrable way, were trying to keep me safe. But safety felt suffocating. Felt like a loss of self. One afternoon, Ji-hoon broke the silence. I was trying to decipher a faded annotation in a book of poetry. "Kong Tae-woo," he said, his voice flat. I looked up. He was staring at me, his eyes dark and intense. "The man you met. His name is Kong Tae-woo." The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it, with a cold, final precision, sent a chill down my spine. "He is a ghost," Ji-hoon continued, his gaze drifting back to the window. "A ghost from a past I had hoped was buried. He believes I owe him a debt." "What kind of debt?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to look at me, and his expression was bleak. "The kind that can never be repaid." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. I saw it then, the connection between the scar on his brow, the chair he was bound to, and the man named Kong. This was not a business rivalry. This was blood. "He is using you to draw me out," he said. "He knows I do not leave. He thinks that by threatening what I value, he can force my hand what I value." The words hung in the air between us, shimmering and dangerous. He had not said you, he had said what I was, a thing. A precious object like the books I was restoring. Pressure point. I felt a surge of cold anger. I am not a chess piece, Mr. Kwan, I said, my voice sharp. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. It was the first time I had used that tone with him. I am not a thing you value, I am a person. And I will not be used in your war. For a long moment, he just looked at me. The silence in the room was so profound I could hear the hum of the city 30 floors below. I expected anger. I expected a cold dismissal. Instead, a look of profound weariness settled on his features. I know, he said softly. That is the crux of the problem, is it not? He maneuvered his chair until he was directly in front of me. He reached out and, for the first time, he touched me. His fingers brushed against a loose strand of hair that had fallen across my face, tucking it gently behind my ear. His touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt through my entire body. It was a gesture of impossible tenderness in a moment of stark confrontation. Go home, Mizan, he said, his voice low and strained. Go home and do not come back. Forget this place. Forget me. My breath caught in my throat. He was letting me go. He was pushing me away, back into the normal, safe world I had been so eager to leave. It was what I should have wanted. It was the sensible thing, the logical thing. I should have packed my tools, collected my final payment, and run. I should have been relieved, but I wasn't. I felt a sense of desolation so vast it threatened to swallow me whole. The thought of never seeing him again, of never sitting in this quiet room with him, of never knowing the end of the story, it was unbearable. No, I said. The word was out before I could stop it. It was small, but it felt enormous. He flinched as if I had struck him. You don't understand, he said, his voice raw. He will not stop. He will hurt you to hurt me. I cannot protect you if you are here. Then let me make my own choice. I insisted, my voice gaining strength. You hired me to do a job. I will finish it. What happens outside of this library is my own concern. I was being foolish. I was being reckless. I knew it. But the fierce, stubborn core of my independence, the part of me that had survived Michael, that had built a life on my own terms, refused to be handled, managed, or sent away for my own good. This is not your concern? He shot back, and for the first time, I heard real anger in his voice. It was a cold, controlled fury. A man threatens you, stalks you, and you think it is not my concern? Do you have any idea of the resources I have dedicated to ensuring you are not so much as jostled on the subway? Every step you take is monitored. Every person you speak to is vetted. You have not had a moment of privacy since the day Kong spoke your name. The confession washed over me, cold and violating. The car service. Mr. Park's knowing looks. The soup. It wasn't care. It was surveillance. It was control. I felt my face flush with heat. You have no right, I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. You have no right to invade my life like that. I have every right, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. You are under my roof. You are in my employ. Your safety is my responsibility. I am not your responsibility, I cried, finally losing the tight grip on my composure. I am not a child. I am not one of your possessions to be guarded and locked away. Then what are you? He demanded, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. What are you, in this room, day after day with a man like me? A man who cannot even stand up to defend you? The question hung in the air, brutal and honest. The room was silent. We were at the precipice. The place where everything would either shatter or be reforged into something new. December arrived, and with it, a cold that bit at the edges of the city. The view from the penthouse window changed. The bruised gold of autumn gave way to the crystalline gray of winter. The city below seemed sharper, harder. So had the atmosphere between us. After our confrontation, a new kind of silence had fallen. It was not the easy silence of companionship, nor the tense silence of a coiled spring. It was a fragile truce, a space of careful, deliberate distance. He stopped pushing me to leave. I stopped pretending I wasn't afraid. We had reached an impasse. I continued my work, my movements precise and automatic. He continued his vigil, a silent sentinel in his own home. He had revealed the extent of his surveillance, and I had revealed the stubborn core of my autonomy. Both of those were true. We did not know how to reconcile them. The threat of Kang Tae-woo was a low hum beneath the surface of our days. I was never alone. The black car was always there. Mr. Park's shadow was a permanent fixture. I began to feel the walls of the penthouse as if they were my own skin. I was safe. I was also a prisoner. I told myself I was staying for the work. I had made a commitment. The collection was a puzzle I was determined to solve. But I knew, in the quiet, honest hours of the night, that I was staying for him. I was staying because the thought of leaving was a physical ache, a tearing. I was staying because for the first time in a very long time I felt seen. Even his suffocating protection was a form of seeing me. He saw me as something worth protecting. The problem was that he didn't see me as capable of protecting myself. My friend Sarah, my last link to a normal life, grew more concerned. "Mina, you have to talk to me," she pleaded over the phone one night. "You're a ghost. You don't go out. You don't answer my texts for hours. This isn't you." "I'm just busy, Sarah," I said, the lie tasting like ash. "This project is consuming." "Is it the project that's consuming you or the client?" she asked, her question hitting too close to the bone. I had no answer for her. How could I explain? How could I describe the gravitational pull of Kwon Ji-hoon? How could I explain that I felt more alive in his silent, dangerous world than I had in years in my own safe one? The breaking point came on a Tuesday, a nothing day, the day it had all begun. I was working on the final volume of his great-grandfather's journals. The paper was thin as a moth's wing. The ink faded to a pale brown. It was the most delicate piece in the collection. As I carefully turned a page, a small, folded piece of paper, not original to the book, fell out. It was modern paper, crisp and white. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was a photograph, a recent one. It was a picture of my apartment building, taken from across the street. There was a red circle drawn around my window. My blood ran cold. He had been there, Kang. He had been watching my home. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the photograph, the room growing dark around me. The fear was a living thing, a cold presence coiling in my gut. This was no longer a vague threat. This was a promise. Mrs. Choi entered silently to clear my untouched lunch tray and turn on the lamps. The sudden shift from gray twilight to warm, amber light made me blink. She paused, her gentle eyes taking in the photograph in my hand, the look on my face. She said nothing, but her hand rested on my shoulder for a single, comforting moment before she retreated. A few minutes later, the door opened. It was not Ji-hoon. It was Mr. Park. "Ms. On," he said, his voice low. "Mr. Kwon requests your presence in his study." It was not a request. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I left the photograph on the table. He would see it. He would know. I followed Mr. Park down the familiar corridor, but we turned left where I usually went straight. He led me to a part of the penthouse I had never seen. The study was a fortress within the fortress. The walls were not glass, but dark wood lined with books. Modern ones on economics, politics, history, warfare. There was a large desk, immaculate save for a bank of dark computer screens. And in the center of the room, Ji-hoon. He was not looking out a window. He was flanked by Mr. Park and another man, a thick-necked individual whose suit could not conceal the bulk of the muscle beneath. The air was thick with menace. This was not the quiet, lonely scholar from the library. This was the man who commanded this silent army. This was the man Kang Tae-woo was trying to draw out. "Sit," Ji-hoon said. It was a command. There was a single, stark chair placed in front of his desk. It felt like an interrogation room. I did not sit. I stood before his desk, my hands clenched. "I saw the picture," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I understand." "No," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You don't. But you will," he gestured to Mr. Park. "Tell her." Mr. Park stepped forward. He did not look at me. He looked at a point just over my shoulder. "Kang Tae-woo has become agitated," he said. the euphemism chilling. He has moved from passive surveillance to active preparation. We believe he intends to breach the building's security. He wants to get to me, Ji-hoon finished, his eyes locked on mine. And he believes you are the only way. His message is clear. Give you up, or he will take you. The room was silent. The whole world was silent. There was only the thumping of my own heart. I finally understood the stakes. I was not a chess piece. I was the prize, the thing to be captured or sacrificed. I looked at Ji-hoon, at his hard, impassive face, at the two grim-faced men beside him. This was his world, a world of threats and countermeasures, of violence that was always just beneath the surface. And I was in the middle of it. I thought about my small, cluttered apartment, my normal life, the simple pleasure of walking to the corner market, of meeting Sarah for coffee without a shadow tailing me. I could have it back. He had offered it to me. Go home. Forget me. All I had to do was walk out that door. I could walk out right now. Mr. Park would escort me. The car service would take me home one last time. By morning, my life would be my own again. The thought was empty. It was a gray, featureless landscape. A life without color, without risk, without the terrifying, vibrant presence of the man in front of me. What do you want me to do? I asked, and the question was for him, only for him. The other two men in the room faded into the background. His face was a mask of stone. He had retreated into the fortress of his stillness, leaving me outside. The other men in the room, Mr. Park and the mountain of a man beside him, seemed to hold their breath. The entire penthouse, with its silent corridors and glass walls, felt like it was listening. I want you to be safe, he said, his voice a low, rough thing. The answer was too simple, too clean. It was the answer a guardian gives, not a partner. It was the answer that kept me at a distance. I took a step closer to the desk, closing the space he had so carefully put between us. The air crackled. I could feel the disapproval from Mr. Park like a physical force. I ignored it. I had been ignoring the world for weeks. I was focused only on the man in the chair. That's not what I asked, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I know you want me to be safe. You've made that abundantly clear. You've wrapped me in layers of protection so thick I can barely breathe. But that safety has a cost. Costs me my life, my choices, myself. So I will ask again. What do you want from me? The shift in preposition was everything. It changed the entire equation. He understood it instantly. I saw the flicker in his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw. This was a negotiation, and I had just changed the terms. He was used to giving orders, to managing outcomes, to moving pieces on a board. He was not used to a piece that talked back. I want, he started, then stopped. The words seemed to catch in his throat. He looked away from me, toward the dark screens of his computers, as if the answer might be found in their streams of data. But the answer wasn't there. It was in this room. It was between us. The silence stretched. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Long enough for a man to die or for a world to change. Mr. Park shifted his weight, a minute sound that was like a gunshot in the stillness. It was a signal. Be careful, sir. Ji-hoon's hands, which had been resting on his desk, clenched into fists. This is not the time for this conversation. Mizon, this is the only time, I countered. Because in a few hours or a few days, Kang Tae-woo is going to make his move. And you are going to have to decide what I am to you. Am I bait? Am I a liability to be neutralized? Or am I something else? The two men flanking him stiffened. Neutralized was a word from their world, not mine. I had used it deliberately. I wanted him to know that I was not naive. I had been living in the shadow of his world long enough to learn its language. He finally looked back at me. The mask was gone. In its place was a raw, aching vulnerability that stunned me. It was the look I had seen for a fleeting second in the library, when we spoke of the grieving father and the painter's son. It was the look of a man who understood loss. Everything I do, he said, his voice strained, is to prevent the past from repeating itself. I lost the use of my legs because I was careless. because I underestimated an enemy. I will not make that mistake again. I will not lose you, I lost you. Past tense. As if I were already his to lose. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The truth, stripped of all its layers of control and command. It was not about protecting an employee. It was not about responsibility. It was about him, about his fear, his past, his loss. I saw the scene he was imagining. Kong getting to me, using me, hurting me, and him helpless in his chair, forced to watch. The same helplessness he must have felt in the moment that put him in that chair to begin with. The silence that followed his confession was profound. It was the silence of a truth that could not be unsaid. The two guards were statues, their faces impassive, but I could feel their shock. Their leader, the man who never explained, who never showed weakness, had just laid his heart bare in front of an outsider. In front of me, and then the moment that would define everything. The moment that led to the silence I have replayed 1,000 times. From the corner of the room, the other man, the mountain, spoke for the first time. His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together. "He is not a man anymore, sir," he said, not to me, but to Ji-hoon. "Kong is an animal. He will not be reasoned with. You cannot show weakness." It was a plea, a warning, a statement of loyalty that was also a profound insult. You cannot show weakness. He was talking about me. My presence here was the weakness. Ji-hoon's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a cold fire I had never seen. But before he could speak, before he could unleash the fury that was gathering in him, he looked at me, and his face crumbled, not into anger, but into a desperate, agonizing shame. He thought I believed it. He thought I saw him as weak. His gaze dropped to his own hands, to his own still legs, and he whispered the words, not to the room, but to himself. A statement of defiance against his own body, against his own fear. "I'm still a man." The words were a punch to the gut. They were filled with so much pain, so much pride, so much history. It was the cry of a king trapped in a broken body. The whole room was silent, waiting for my reaction, for Ji-hoon's explosion, for Mr. Park to remove me. They were waiting for the scene to play out according to the rules of their world, a world of power and dominance and violence. I took a deep breath. I looked at the man who had just insulted his boss. I looked at Mr. Park, whose face was a mask of controlled panic. And then I looked at Kwon Ji-hoon, the man who had surrounded me with spies and offered me soup. The man who tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. The man who saw me as both a vulnerability and something precious. And I gave him my answer, the answer that left the whole room silent. "I have never, for 1 second, thought you were not." The silence that followed my words was not empty. It was a solid thing, a change in atmospheric pressure. It was the sound of a world tilting on its axis. Mr. Park, the mountain of a man, Ji-hoon, all three of them were frozen, caught in the gravity of what I had said. It was not a declaration of love. It was not a promise. It was a statement of fact. A simple, unvarnished truth that cut through all the layers of power, fear, and posturing. "I see you, the real you, and I am not afraid." Ji-hoon was the first to move. He slowly, deliberately, lifted his head. His eyes found mine, and they were shining with an emotion I could not name. It was not gratitude. It was not relief. It was recognition. The profound, soul-shaking recognition of being truly seen by another person. He held my gaze for a full 10 seconds. I counted. In those 10 seconds, the negotiation was over. A new contract was written between us, without a single word being spoken. The two men beside him seemed to shrink, to become part of the background again. They were no longer relevant. There was only him and there was only me. He broke the silence. "Mr. Park," he said, his voice clear and steady, all trace of the earlier strain gone. "Escort Mr. Cho out. His services are no longer required." The mountain, Mr. Cho, blinked. His face was a mask of disbelief. "Sir, you heard me?" Ji-hoon said, his tone mild, but with an underlying edge of steel that was unmistakable. "You have served my family for a long time. Your pension will be generous. You are dismissed." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The command was absolute. Mr. Park, ever the professional, simply inclined his head. "This way, Mr. Cho." He placed a hand on the larger man's elbow. For a moment it looked like Cho might resist. His jaw worked, his fists clenched. He looked from Ji-hoon's implacable face to mine. His expression a mixture of confusion and fury. Then, with a grunt, he seemed to deflate. He allowed Mr. Park to guide him from the room. The heavy door closed behind them with a quiet, final click. And then there were two. "That was rash," I said into the quiet. An almost smile touched his lips. The real thing this time. It reached his eyes. "It was necessary. He saw you as a weakness. I cannot have anyone near me who is that blind." He gestured to the chair I had refused to take earlier. "Sit." Please, this time I sat. The dynamic had shifted. We were no longer commander and subordinate, protector and protected. We were two people in a room about to make a decision. "Kong will make his move tonight," he said, his voice calm. "Our intelligence is certain. He has acquired tactical entry gear and a four-man team. He believes this building's weakness is the rooftop access." "And is it?" I asked. "It was," he said. "It is no longer." He leaned forward. "The desk no longer a barrier between us, but a table we shared. He will come for you. He will try to take you from this apartment. His goal is to get you on that roof and use you as a bargaining chip to get me up there." "And what is your plan?" I asked, my heart steady. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overlaid with a strange, new sense of calm. I had chosen my side. "My plan," he said, his eyes holding mine, "was to have Mr. Park and his team intercept them on the 18th floor and neutralize the threat before they ever got near this level. It was a clean, efficient plan that guaranteed your safety and my privacy." Was past tense. "And now?" I asked. "Now," he said, and he took a breath. This was it. The choice. His and mine. "Now, the plan is whatever you choose it to be. Option 1 is the same. You can go to the safe room at the end of the hall. It is shielded, secure, you will hear nothing, and this will all be over by morning. You will be perfectly safe. And I will have lied to you. I will have managed you, just as I promised myself I would not." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. He was offering me the illusion of choice, while still holding all the cards. But then he continued. "Option 2, he said, and his voice dropped. "Option 2 is that you trust me. You stay here, with me. We let Kong get closer. We let him believe his plan is working. And we end this together. It is riskier. For you. It means you will be in the room when the danger is near. But it is the more honest option." He was offering me a role in my own story. He was offering me the one thing I had been fighting for all along. The right to choose even if the choice was dangerous. He was giving me the autonomy I had demanded. And it was the most terrifying and wonderful thing anyone had ever offered me. I looked around the study, at this command center of his power, at this man who had been so opaque and was now so painfully, beautifully transparent. I thought of the journals, of the men who misunderstood each other to their graves. I would not be one of them. "There is a third option," I said. He raised a scarred eyebrow, intrigued. "You and I are going to have a cup of tea in the library," I said. "I am going to finish my work on your great-grandfather's journal. Mr. Park and his team can handle your ghost. Your war is not my war, Ji-hoon." I used his first name for the first time. Felt like a key turning in a lock. A shock went through him. I saw it in his eyes. A direct hit. "My safety is not a prize to be won in a battle you orchestrate," I continued. "And my trust is not something you gain by putting me in the room where it happens. You gain it by letting me live my life. The life I was hired for." I stood up. "I am a restorer of books, Mr. Kwan. That is my purpose here. I suggest you let me fulfill it. And I suggest you trust your men to do their jobs." For a moment, I thought I had gone too far. He stared at me, his face unreadable. The silence stretched, and this time I didn't count. I just waited, and then he laughed. It was not the almost smile. It was not a flicker. It was a real, deep, rumbling laugh. A sound of pure, unadulterated shock and delight. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Ms. On," he said, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. "You are going to be the death of me." "I rather hope not," I said, a small smile playing on my own lips. "I haven't submitted my final invoice yet." He laughed again, shaking his head in disbelief. Then he took a deep breath, and his expression turned serious again, but it was a new seriousness, a shared seriousness. "Very well, Mina," he said, the sound of my first name on his lips a quiet promise. "We will have tea." He was true to his word. We had tea. Not in the library, which Mr. Park had discreetly informed him was now considered part of the active perimeter. A phrase that was both chilling and absurd. Instead, Mrs. Choi served us in the main living area, the one with the two-story glass wall overlooking the glittering, indifferent city. She set down the tray with her usual silent grace, but her eyes lingered on me for a second, a look of quiet approval. She knew a shift in power when she saw one. Ji-hoon had positioned his chair not facing the window, as he usually did, but facing the center of the room, facing me. We sat across from each other, a low table between us, the delicate porcelain cups steaming in the amber light. It was the most surreal moment of my life. I knew that somewhere in the floors below us, or perhaps on the roof above, men were preparing for violence. A ghost from Ji-hoon's past was coming to claim a debt, with me as the currency. And here we were, having tea. "You are not afraid," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of wonder. "I am terrified," I corrected him gently, wrapping my hands around the warmth of my cup. "But there is a difference between being afraid and being controlled by fear. I spent too many years of my life letting fear make my world smaller. I'm not willing to do that anymore." He nodded, a slow, thoughtful movement. He understood. He, more than anyone, understood a life made smaller by a single violent event. We were more alike than I had ever imagined. "The man I was before, the accident," he began, his voice hesitant. It was the first time he had ever referenced his past so directly. "He would have admired your courage. He also would have dismissed it as reckless. He would have locked you in the safe room and considered it an act of love." "And the man you are now?" I asked softly. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, his gaze clear and direct. "The man I am now is learning that love is not about control. It is about trust." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine where it rested on the smooth wood. His skin was warm. His touch was firm, certain. Not a question, but a statement. "Mine if you choose it." I didn't pull away. I turned my hand over and laced my fingers with his.